you so much, everyone, for joining today. So I'm delighted that we could all be gathered because it's been a really, really interesting couple of months, I would say, in terms of this particular topic with tourists. I think sustainability has always been something that I've been super passionate about in terms of my work and also my research. But I think I always wanted to try and use that research and that kind of insight into alpine sports and specifically tourism. I think we all really enjoy being in the mountains of the group that are here today, and I think it's a really critical inflection point that we're at, where it's important for us to actually consider the different levers by which we can connect tourists with sustainability. And I think everyone that's in the room today is really at the forefront of that, and it really gives me amazing energy to welcome everybody here today. So in terms of our panel, we've got a really great lineup for you for different experts all across the world, actually. So we've got teams dialing in from the UK, also the Netherlands, India, Switzerland, also Austria as well. And so, yeah, a really diverse group of people here today, and a lot of people that are really engaged on sustainability for many years. So I think I feel very humbled and lucky that we've got this group of experts around the table here today. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel, and just to let you know in terms of how the session is going to work. So we have a panel session for 45 minutes with a Q&A, and then we move into breakout rooms that are facilitated by our experts on sustainability. So the panel here today, we've got Dan Elkan, who is the founder of Snowcarbon. We've got Sally Warren, who is the co-founder of Whoski. We've got Lonneke de Kort, who is the CEO of bookdifferent.com, and she's based in Amsterdam. We've got Maria Kuzma, who's a professional snowboarder and activist, and also an entrepreneur in circular economy. We have Laura MacCallum, who is the general manager at Protect Our Winters UK, who are doing a lot of work to engage on sustainability with the snowboard and ski community and mountain community in general. And then our two facilitators for the breakout rooms are Gary Sharma and Ruth Blackshaw, who are both researchers with me at CISL, which was the Cambridge University Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And both of them have a really strong background in sustainability. One, Gary, on sustainable fashion, and Ruth, who works at the UN and is very engaged on the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. So that's who we've got in the room today, and it gives me a lot of joy to welcome you all for this session. So with that, I'm going to turn to our first speaker, who's Dan. So Dan, I know that I remember hearing about you, actually, which is always a good sign, at a conference on alpine tourism, and I think it was the ski and snowboard show, and everyone's like, you need to speak to Dan, he's really engaged on this topic. And I think ever since we've started that discussion more than a year ago, I think you've really had such a strong vision for why sustainable mobility is really important in the alpine tourism agenda. And so I wanted to ask you, why is it that it's important for tourists to consider their mobility impact, and what stops people from actually considering that more? Do you think, are there certain factors that are preventing it, such as price? Is it policy? Is it just a lack of awareness? What are the kind of challenges, I guess, to people engaging on sustainable mobility?
Yeah. From an importance point of view, if you take kind of carbon emissions, if you like, of a ski holiday, there was a study that some of you will be familiar with, done about 10 years ago. Oh, that's the noise of my oven in the background, which is now on, so it's like a ghost in the machine. This study looked at the whole carbon emissions of a ski resort, and it was undertaken by Mountain Riders and ADEME in France, which is a government organisation, and it found that 57% of the carbon emissions of a ski resort is solely the result of transport, and most of that transport is holidaymakers to the resort. So that's the biggest factor in a ski holiday, and the emissions of going by train versus plane or driving are much smaller. So if you look at a one-way journey to, for example, from the UK to a resort, any resort in the Alps, really, you will look at an average of around 12 kilograms of CO2, 105 kilograms of CO2 by plane, about 225 by car, but that could be a full car, so you could divide that number of people, and about 12 by train. Those are like average figures. It does depend on various things, but you can see the difference is really significant.
Significantly less, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the, there's a real kind of prize out there in terms of much more sustainable ski holidays if we can persuade people, inspire people, enable people to travel that way. But that's not as easy as it might seem, because there's lots of factors that are stacked against that. The good thing is the journeys are great. There's so many different benefits that are non-environmental. It's not a sacrifice in many ways, but it's still changing the psychology, and but B, changing the system, and those two go kind of hand in hand. So traditionally, for the past 30 or so years since we've had kind of like low-cost airlines, you've had the idea that people could just jump on a quick flight. People going for weekend breaks, people were traveling to the Alps with flights. And there's always been this myth, if you like, that, it's just a short hop, but on paper it looks really quick. When you actually do the journeys by plane, which I did when I started traveling, it's amazing how long it takes. Something that's a 90-minute flight turns into 9 hours door to door, and you're like, I don't understand why it takes so long, but it's kind of like the story of the tortoise and the hare. And that same amount of time, people could, instead of being stuck on this kind of like conveyor belt of boredom through airports and airport queues and cramped transfers and traffic, they could be sitting on trains, one train, two train, or three trains. But either way, their journey is quality blocks of time. And so one of the things I think is really painting a picture to people of what those journeys are like, as an alternative to the airport transfer model, or the long drives that people, if you go all the way, you've got however long it takes, like 14 hours driving. That's a lot of backache to start a ski holiday with. And I think that psychology of people going, do you know what? My time is valuable. Everyone's time is valuable, but to spend 9 hours, like sitting with your friends or with your family, scenery gliding past, able to go, stroll to the cafe bar. And I'm talking pre-COVID, because COVID's obviously changed travel for everyone in every way, and sitting there with a mask isn't as fun. You'll be doing that whether in airport queues and on flights as well, but it's taken a lot of the joy, if you like, out of travel. But it hasn't taken the responsibility out of travel in terms of saying, look, can I make this journey more sustainably? How much is my time worth? How much is the environment worth? And can I, what's the big deal if I have to, some of the objections people raise, like, I've got to bring all my luggage with you. Well, you do anyway. You've got to bring it to the airport. Okay, you've got to take it onto a train and stash it there. It's not the biggest deal. We shouldn't like babyfy ourselves and go, well, it has to be totally easy for me. Otherwise I'm not doing it. It's like, you're going to go and have a ski holiday. You care about the mountains. You care about the planet. You have a great journey in so many other ways. There might be a little bit more of moving your bags on and off a train than there would taking it through the airport. It's such a minor thing. Treat it as a gym workout. If there's still time, I'll talk about some of the reasons, the kind of systemic reasons why more people don't travel this way. Is that?
Yeah.
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 One is lack of information. When I first started thinking about going on holiday by train, instead of flying, after I'd seen a railway track near a resort in Italy, when I tried to look up the journeys and find out how to do it, how long it takes, where to go, how to get a local bus from the station up to the resort, or how much a taxi would cost, it could be a real wild goose chase in terms of the information. And that was 20 years ago, and it's still the case today. Like, I can write articles about this. I've started a website about it, but there's so much more that the entire industry could be doing in terms of communicating this information and making it really simple for people to find out what they need to know. And this is a problem not peculiar to skiing. It's, if you try and book a campsite in the UK, for example, they might say where the nearest station is, but they don't say how far it is or give you for a local taxi. So you've got to go and do the donkey work yourself. And every single person that's thinking about going by train to that hotel or to that campsite or to wherever it is have to then do this research. Why not do the research on behalf of your clients? Put it up there, save them the time, take one step out of that journey they need to do to be able to make the journey by train. And the other is that the second thing is the entire European rail booking system is not fit for purpose in terms of the fact that the algorithms can't cope with the complexity of putting schedules, schedules and tickets together. You go onto sites like Trainline, Eurostar, or SNCF, or Rail Europe, and the options you see are a fraction of the possibilities that you could have, and very often not the most convenient journeys for a skier. Often with changing times in Paris, for example, that are too tight because the algorithm
very tight
connect your things together. So it's really, and often there are trains available, but the websites say they're not available because the website hasn't found a way of merging the schedule with the available tickets, and it just gets confused. It goes, oh, no, nothing available, and it's just not true. So people could miss out on journeys they could have made. There's far too little kind of social proof out there, which is, on Snowcarbon, we've got a section called Your Stories where skiers write in experiences and pictures. I think that's scratching the surface. There is so much insight and inspiration that comes from hearing how other people have made the journeys, what they've discovered, what their tips are, think about things. And I think, that's really exciting that we could do a lot more with that. There are far too few packages with rail travel included. I mean, tour operators now are having a torrid time generally because, the ski holiday landscape is looking so unpredictable. But for years, they have struggled to persuade, and I've tried to help them as well, and struggled to persuade the train companies to actually think in a way that embraces the industries they serve. And it's been very difficult for tour operators to get Eurostar and SNCF to say, look, here's a price for the train travel that you can use as part of a package, and it's a little bit predictable to make it easier for you to sell to your clients so they can book tickets through you with the travel included, all very nice, transport, accommodation, rail travel in a nice, easy package ahead of time. It's incremental business for the train companies. It's great for the tour operators. It's fantastic for the skier, makes it much easier. And of course, for the Alps and for the planet and for the sustainability, it's wonderful. But that doesn't happen because train companies bury their heads in the sand, don't care, don't seem to care, and they just want to try and put people on independently themselves. And they don't care that much about international travel either. It's a small portion of their market. They're all focused on domestic. They all have their own systems. They all don't seem to be able to work together collaboratively, and they need their heads knocking together by some future-looking politicians who can really go, look, this system is a total pile of pants, and it will continue to be a pile of pants unless we actually kick some companies up the arse and say, excuse my French, and say, you've got to do better because people cannot travel sustainably this way, and we need people to be able to.
That's really fascinating what you say, because I pick out three key things that stand out from my side. I think the psychology and the behavioral factors is so critical. I think in so many of the discussions I've had, it's one of the biggest barriers. I think one thing from my perspective as priority is to make train travel cool, because it's that association with the lifestyle choice. And I think in everything that we're saying today with the other speakers as well, I think we'll really strongly touch upon that, because I think, like you said, that kind of social proof is really critical. And I think social media can also be quite an enabler of that when you get the right influencers to spread that message and connect through. I think the point about the interconnectivity of the different stakeholders is very key. So I've come across a couple of examples recently where hotels, it was specifically in Austria, but they were giving discount to guests that were arriving by train, so they get a 5% discount on their stay. And so I think they were trying to encourage that sustainable behavior, but it really does also require those train companies to actually step up and engage on a very interconnected service model, which is different from what they currently have. So a good example of this is looking at packages around kind of different, night trains linked with certain ski resorts, and looking at how can there be an interconnectivity of the leisure choice with the mobility choice, so that you do get the most sustainable outcome. And I think that in terms of some of the models and pathways forward, that's something that I really would like to explore next year as well, because I think in everything that we do on the sustainability research side, you can only get that systems thinking if you have the interconnectedness of the stakeholders coming together and saying, right, what is our common goal? And crucially, how can we achieve the objectives of our organizations with also working together for a sustainable outcome? And so I think it's really exciting to see where that goes into next year, because I think COVID has shown that actually businesses that never interacted before are starting to engage. I mean, who would have known that you'd have alcohol companies plugging together and making hand sanitizer in their same factories? And yet that's something that's happened in a pandemic. And so I think that sharing of supply chains and of basically customer values is something that we'll see hopefully a lot more of next year. And I think the work that you're doing and some of the ideas that you're developing in that space are really critical to those types of discussions. This brings me really nicely actually onto Sally. So Sally is the co-founder, of Whoski, and Sally's so Whoski is doing a lot of work on basically rental of ski gear and of snow sports gear, and looking at how can you actually progress circular economy of that service. And so Sally, I wanted to ask you so Dan mentioned about mobility choice. So in this discussion, how can clothing choice actually support the circular economy, and can tourists create a responsible wardrobe when they travel, and what are some of the enablers of that in the context that you work in?
A very good question. If I can just clarify, we're actually a peer-to-peer marketplace where you can sell pre-loved ski gear rather than rental, but we're very pro the rental market as well. Well, clothing should really be one of the easiest ways of supporting the circular economy, but unfortunately with ski gear, it's one of the hardest ways of supporting it. We all know about reduction, reuse, recycle, but I'd just like to touch base on some of the challenges with ski clothes and why they are a major issue. The first is the obstacle is what they're made from. They're layers. They have zips. They have PFCs, fluorocarbons, which creates the waterproofing element. They're basically impossible to either recycle, and they don't degrade within the earth as well. It's also about thinking about where they come from and how. So depending on where they came from, there might be certain types of dye that are used which aren't appropriate for the environment. Who's making them? Are they being paid fair wages? How are they being transported to the UK or Europe? Is it by air, ship or road? There's talk about more coming by train, but not enough. Maybe that's something Dan can tackle next, is getting clothes by train into the UK. And who is selling them to us as well? What are their green policies? At the moment, many of the traditional high street and online retailers aren't very clear what our clothes are made out of and what you can do with them afterwards. And then we get them into our wardrobes, and it's, well, how long do you keep those things in your wardrobes? So how often do you wear your ski jacket? Are you just wearing it for skiing if you go once a year, or are you using it when you walk up on the mountains and other things? How are you actually washing them when they're in your wardrobe? Because of the microfibers that seep from ski gear. And how long will they last? So are you buying stuff that can be repaired? Is it good quality stuff? And then lastly, it's when you don't want them anymore, what are you actually doing with them? And certainly in the UK, most of us take stuff to the charity shop, but around 70% of the stuff in the charity shop often ends up in landfill and doesn't get resold. So there is a bit of a culture of lending stuff, especially with families, or selling it on. I mean, this is the reason why we started Whoski.com. We were parents with kids who every year were growing out their ski gear when we went skiing. And we hated the thought of that not being reused. We were borrowing. We felt having a platform to enable people to sell to each other was really important. I think what's really positive that's come out of it is we're seeing 18 to 24-year-olds have a very different attitude towards this. And you talked about the psychology of it. They see pre-loved as really important. It kind of takes me back to when I was growing up, and I used to go to Camden Market and buy secondhand gear there. And the Wombles were on the telly and the Clangers, if anyone knows them. And it was all about how you reuse. And we had that sort of fed into us. And for some reason, we dropped it along the line. So ultimately, our platform allows customers to connect to other customers to buy and sell their pre-loved ski gear. But I think what's really important, Sarisher, is the stats and why these things shouldn't be going into landfill. Polyester and nylon use fossil fuels, and ski gear is on the whole made out of polyester and nylon. So the stuff we're using now is still likely to be in our mountains, in the rivers, in the seas for the next 200 years or so. It's not going anywhere, and we know that's already an issue. In 2018, $460 billion worth of wearable clothing was discarded. That was Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And in the UK, 350,000 tonnes of clothing goes into landfill every year. That is an extraordinary amount. That's around 11 million garments a week. I think this year we've probably seen a change, and I don't think those statistics will be the same representative of 2020 for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And in London, where I live, 23% of our clothes are never worn in our wardrobes. And these are things which impact enormously. So if we keep them in our wardrobe, what's the point of that? Let someone else reuse them or wear them. And there's always the stat that we wear clothes an average of 7 times, which isn't very much at all. But there's also, and Dan touched on this, it's the political side of it. In 2006, the Environmental Protection Agency here said we should stop using PFCs. It was a voluntary requirement and clearly hasn't worked. And you need governance to make those changes. In 2018, the Environmental Audit Committee proposed some really good environmental changes. Nothing was adapted through the UK government. But in France, they're starting to pull their socks up a bit. In 2018, they made some legal changes about the fashion because they realised how important the fashion industry is, but also how it is really impacting on an international level from when it starts to when it finishes. And they're having to change their supply chain, and there's much more transparency. And I think that's a really important way to go. So for us, I guess that gives you a bit about the why, and it gives you a bit about what the impact is. But so how do we make those changes? Well, the first thing I'd suggest, see where it comes from, what it's made from. Are there any marks to prove someone was fair or wage? Does it have green certification? If you're buying bright coloured ski wear, it's likely that you use it was very strong dye was used to that. So do consider what it's made, the whole process to get to that stage. Unfortunately, even choosing natural fibres isn't always the best option. If you use something like cotton, the water usage is enormous. So, but at least longer term, it's probably more beneficial for the environment. I think what we're really seeing the change here in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in Europe. And well, some of these businesses aren't just UK based, but we're seeing the pop-up of strong green retailers for ski and outdoor gear like Patagonia, Eco Ski, Surf Dome, that I know you guys know, Planks.
Yeah.
And they've made life easier for us because they're very clear about why they've chosen those items how they've chosen it, and also what they're doing afterwards. You know, some of them are putting them onto Whoski so people resell. So they're really thinking about the whole process with ski gear. And I think one of the other changes is eco doesn't mean you're going to be sitting in a soggy ski jacket that doesn't work. It's really changed, and it's really beneficial for everybody. Get your clothes. Sorry.
No, go
on. I'd say get your clothes repaired. There's places in the Three Valleys and in ski resorts where they have repair vans, and I think that's really fun. So if you rip your ski gear, if you've eaten too much cheese fondue and you're going down to slopes, and unfortunately that where they always rip, which is usually on someone's backside, you can go and get them mended rather than having to buy a new pair of salopettes or something. So I guess the thing I would say is keep your wardrobe for longer, keep your ski gear for longer. Wear your things more often, wear them in the UK. It's getting cold, put it on, pass it on, use a guppy bag or something for washing, which will stop those microfibers going into our water systems. Sell on a secondhand platform, and do your investigation into where you're buying it from, and look at some of the newer brands that are coming through as well, which is a really exciting place to be. I mean, this year's been very difficult. I think for a lot of these brands, it will have been a very challenging season for them. But that over the next few years, we'll see people really being persuaded by this new market, and that eco doesn't work anymore.
And I think what's brilliant in what you say is that it's really about consumers using their activism of consumer choice to actually make the right decision. And I think something that really strikes me in what you say is that the transparency and the traceability means that you should be demanding more from those brands as well, right? And I think the discussion that we had in SATI actually about 2 weeks ago, and check it out, it's on the YouTube channel, but it was specifically about the responsibility for the brands to step up as well, because the consumer demands this. And I think the more that we use our consumer voice, the more that will also put pressure on brands to engage and to really try to do better than they currently do. I think some of the stats you said are really stark, and I think that brings it home as to why it's so important that initiatives like yours exist, and that you're engaging on this and pushing it further. I think one thing I notice is when I go to ISPO, it really is, and that's the big kind of outdoor exhibition. It really is. Often brands say to me, "Oh, you're the only person that's asked me about sustainability this weekend," and I think this is crazy. This is the world's biggest outdoor trade fair, and why is nobody asking about this? And so I think there's a really big role to question and to really have that natural inquisition to push the brands as well. And I think I love that in what you say. This brings me really nicely onto Lonneke. So Lonneke, I know that you set up bookdifferent.com, and essentially your cause is really about helping tourists to understand the sustainability impact of a hotel and try to make the most responsible choice and give that transparency of information so that they can do that. Can you explain a little bit about why it's so important for tourists to engage on sustainable lifestyle choices when they do decide where to spend their leisure time and choose a hotel, and what's the feedback been in terms of the clients that you engage with and also the hotels as well? Because I think it would be really useful for people on the call to hear a bit about that. I think you might be on mute.
Yes, I was on mute, and I was thanking you for giving me the opportunity to take part of this interesting conference. And yes, certainly, Book Different's goal is to inform or to make it easy for travelers, but also business travelers, to make the right choice in choosing destinations and hotels or resorts. And of course, this is also applicable for mountain areas or ski resort areas, or ski areas. And yes, there are many things you can do in making a wise decision. Just for your information, what we did, we gathered 1.8 million hotels, which are at different.com, to what if they are certified or not, and how they are compliant with the 4 pillars of sustainability, so how it's managed, how with nature and environment, social, and the management part, so how it's all arranged. And we are showing the carbon footprint. And this we do the same for destinations. So we have tried to bring this all together on one platform so that you can make this choice easily. But if I refer to sustainability, it's a lifestyle, and what you can do indeed of choosing how you get somewhere to a destination, what you wear, it's the same what you can choose. So the power of consumers is very strong, is what you choose to make this decision as well. So for me, sustainable travel is about leveraging the burdens and the benefits of tourism for the nature, so the environment, for the local destinations itself, the people in the village living there, but also the tourists coming over. And if you are able to leverage this out, then certainly we talk about sustainability in tourism. And you can do a number of things to make a better decision. This starts with what destination do you choose? And at Book Different, we choose to work with certified hotels and destinations. And I don't say that certification is a holy grail, but also referring to the story regarding garments or ski gear. Certification at least gives a very clear guideline on requirements you have to commit to and to be compliant with. That is all about the sustainability. So that's why we choose it, and it's impartial because somebody else takes the decision and verifies the compliance of these standards. So if you choose a sustainable destination, this already is a good start. And what is a sustainable destination? A sustainable destination has put measures in place to make sure that it's indeed doing the right things for nature and to have this. That's one thing. This is about how you practice it, what you do with the hotels that you have, or the the tour operators who are coming there, but also to make sure that the right people earn the right things. And I was checking the internet. You have a number of them that are not certified, so you don't have certified destinations that are really only for skiing, but mountain areas. You have a number of them, for example, Avoria and Saas-Fee and Zermatt and Kapoen. But you also have organizations like Alpine Pearls, and these are, you must know, I think you recognize, or you know this organization as well. They have combined a number of villages in Austria, Switzerland, and Italy, and they have a commitment towards how do you get there so that you can reach it by train, the mobility inside the village. There are no cars allowed. It's about how you use energy. It's about restaurants making sure that they offer the local food instead of having it flying in from somewhere else. So this is one important thing that you can choose. You can also look at certified. You can these destinations brand their destination as well with certification. The logos, and of course how you get there, and this is what Dana was already telling. Are you going to by train? Do you share your cars? Do you take the bus? Avoid flying. Check if you can even do it locally, so that explore these opportunity. Then of course, where do you stay? And this is where we start. We started our journey with Book Different. We first wanted to understand what is a sustainable hotel. And this, of course, sustainability can be perceived in different ways, but at least one of a number of topics that have to be taken care of. And this is everything that has to do with the environmental issues. And this is how certification started initially. It's what energy is used, what they do with the waste, what they do with the water, but then also how you wash the cleaning materials you use, but also what food do you offer in your restaurant? How do you pay your people? Are the wages fair? Are the working hours okay? And this gives a very good indication what the impact is of this hotel for you, and also for the rest of the world. Then you can, of course, have a say about what are you doing. Are you going to the market? Are you renting a house instead of staying in a hotel, or are you visiting this restaurant that is offering veggies more than meat, or that has local dishes? and of course how you behave yourself in respect to littering and so on and so on. So you have quite some impact yourself in what decision you actually take in the matter of sustainability, and it's all about common sense. So it's about using your brains. I think this is what we need to do much more. But of course, you have your own influence as a consumer or as a holiday maker, but what is important as well, and this is what I see, for example, in the textile industry already much more forward, there these big brands take their responsibility. What I see is that there is still a lack in strategy for big tour operators that make the right decisions. What imagine if you just decide as a tour operator not to offer flights or anymore, but only go by train? Or what if you decide as a tour operator that you only work with certified resorts? Or hey, it's something like this. And what if you just take a understanding or say as one sector, we will bring back or we align with the Paris Agreement, we'll bring back our CO2 because this is possible. And then, of course, we have the next step, and this is something what I see very strongly developed, for example, in Slovenia. There, the country as a whole took the decision that tourism is only sustainable tourism. They even support, they have legislation around this. Yeah. They have targets regarding bringing back CO2. They have money available for companies in tourism that decide to move towards more sustainable ways. So that's also a very strong push from the government to bring tourism towards a certain level of sustainability.
That's fascinating what you say, because it's about all of the different layers. And I say layers in a horizontal way, so it's not hierarchical, because I think there's the lever of the policy side, and I think I saw I think the Australian government just put paper out actually last night on sustainability and tourism. I need to I don't speak German, so I need to try and digest it in English. But I think that policy driver and the decision of the government to say, yes, we will go this pathway, then supports a kind of follow on from businesses and also from tourists, I guess, to see that destination as trying to really engage in this. I think the second layer that you mentioned of the consumer is really critical, because it's a holistic approach of what they can look at to make the right choice. And I think that's something that is often not necessarily the key priority for them, because they don't realize that is something that's available, right? And I think what you're doing is great, because you're giving them the access to that information. And I think that's what's really interesting going forward potentially, is also the impact, and it might come up in the breakout rooms, of the intergenerational factors, because I think I asked a lot of hotels this during my research to say, okay, do you think that it's a generational engagement that's shifting? And a lot of them said yes, but then a lot of them said that also the older generation of hoteliers are engaging on this topic too, because it's a kind of not a blast to the past, but it is a little bit about integrating that historical knowledge that's been passed on many generations, and seeing how you can use that as an advantage going forward. So I think that's really fascinating. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to switch across to Maria. And I see some questions coming in the chat as well, and we'll be taking those in about 10 minutes, just to let everybody know. So we will move to the Q&A, but we'll get to that in a moment. So Maria, thank you so much for joining today as well. I think in many of the things that the other panelists have spoken about, they have touched upon some of the things that you're really progressing in terms of using your voice and being a sphere of influence across a real bridge of different people. I know that you're obviously an athlete with Thule, and your background is in infrastructure and architecture. And I think what's really interesting in what you're doing is that you're bringing a merger of lots of different passions on sustainability into your sport, and you're using your sport for good. So I wanted to ask you about why you feel like it's important to use your sport for good, and what's that journey really been like over the last few years? Because I think there's a lot of power in using your voice, and I think in your specific position, I think that actually you can not only love your sport, but you can use it for the good of both humanity and also the planet. So yeah, I wanted to ask you a bit about that today.
Thanks, Sarisher, and thanks for having me. And what an amazing panel today too. Wow, so cool. And I've been also taking track of the time as well, so I'm going to try and keep this quick. There's so much to talk about though. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think as athletes, we do have a big responsibility to bring people's awareness to the environmental and social issues through like my interaction with, you know, the mother nature, but also like to bring awareness to the positive and negative interactions. And my approach has always been, like, with my experience not only as a snowboarder living in the Austrian mountains, but also as a traveling architect, and seeing that kind of perspective on the difference between quality of living, access to power, water quality, waste management, everything kind of, you know, okay, I live in the Austrian mountains, it's so beautiful, and then I go do some work in Brazil for some, and it's completely different. So how can I, you know, take that experience? But yeah, my approach has always been basically from an architect's point of view. I'd like to think like, how can I make an impact through my sponsors? Like, how can I convince them to enable me to make a change with the skills that I have through maybe architecture and like, I've been like kind of chasing that approach for about 3 years now. It's interesting how the approach through construction projects has now actually circled back to the snow industry through, like you said, through the company of New Cycle, which we've been hyper focusing on since the start of COVID. So to be quick, like, I'm a Thule ambassador. And I approached them with, convince them to help us do a construction of a new school in Brazil. And that was myself and another Thule crew member, an extreme kayaker. And he's used his whole career to research the water quality of rivers going through urban cities in Brazil. And as you can imagine, the cities, the rivers are dying. And so we're using this build project as, first of all, as a prototype to implement new construction materials, taking out, concrete is a big issue globally. And then also, how can we reintroduce the users of the school and the community back into the river and be like, hey, this is a new, beautiful resource that we need to take care of. And how can we make the building interactive with the children so that they can learn, oh, these wastewater gardens are filtering the water from the toilets and can be used again. How can we use IoT devices to show us what our water use is, and so that we're consistently being made aware of every day about this beautiful resource, which is being kind of oppressed globally. So that's one issue. And then, as we were doing the Recycle Build project with Thule, I took that as an advantage to propose another building project, which was based in the United States, to make live work affordable for the young creatives, because the mental state of that is like another issue I could talk about. But then during COVID, while I was working on all those things, like I said, I joined the team at New Cycle, which is basically, we're building a product that allows people to support the companies and take accountability for their waste, the waste impact, through like a simple kind of waste offset service. So we're basically analyzing the waste impact of like an individual's actions and a company's actions to kind of support like the new development of new materials that can be implemented into, for example, textiles or snowboard companies, or even like shampoo bottles, and it's basically, we're building an infrastructure that allows us to transform our waste into new valuable materials or even commodities, like the ones that we are implementing into our Recycle Build project. And a good example is that Thule have come on board and said, oh, we would like you to do a waste impact of our bags. And now it's like the circle, like they supported our Recycle Build construction project, which is supporting the implementation of sustainable materials, into building projects, which is like the construction industry alone is a massive impact on global waste. And then also, hey, how can you help us offset the waste of our bag and make it new cycled. So I don't know, like your question was like, how can others learn from this approach? I mean, I just think it's time that we are more responsible for the time that we have as athletes. You know, we can use our free time. Like I used to work in New York City as an architect. I had no time. But now as an athlete, like Tule was like, Maria, stop working in New York, you know, take some time and figure out some solutions. And now that I have the time, now that I took the decision to be like, okay, I'm just going to work on solutions, all of my free time is used thinking up solutions.
And I think what's incredible in what you say is the interconnectedness of everything. So, for example, you might have started out as an athlete, but then you realize, okay, I'm going to use my professional career as an architect within that, and then I'm going to merge that with multiple sustainable development goals, to be honest, not just looking at SDG 12 for sustainable consumption and production, but looking at climate action, looking at community engagement on reduction of poverty, education, climate action. There's a whole kind of the rainbow of the SDGs, I would say, that you're trying to push forward. And I think that's fantastic to hear that athletes are looking at that, and you yourself, I think, are an incredible example and inspiration for what is possible to use your sport for good in every aspect of your life, right? And I think that's what's amazing. And this brings me perfectly onto Lauren. Last but not least, and I think what's amazing about what you're doing, Lauren, at POW is that you really do take what is such a systemic issue of climate change and help people to understand the practical pathways forward to which they can influence and make a difference. And I wanted to finish the panel for the last kind of 5 minutes or so, just running through why you think it's important that we as communities, as mountain communities, as people that like being in the outdoors, use our activism for good. And could you explain a bit about, I know it's hard because I think you're doing such incredible things at POW, and I wondered on the community side, how can we use our voice for good, and what kind of advice can you give to the people in the room here today about why engaging on those systemic issues is really important?
Yeah, well, thanks for me on board. And yeah, well, I think it's a great question. And I think, you know, we need to first define what activism means, because I think, you know, we think about activism and I think our minds cast to this sort of sandwich board, picket line when we think of a sort of activist. But as Maria's just beautifully, you know, explained and exampled, that her activism has been finding the solutions, making the noise, using her sphere of influence, and communicating that outwards in the language that our community will understand. Because I think here, just now, as everyone's sustainable professionals or work within the industry, you know, we've got to remember our audience. That's where POW really comes in to almost act like that translator between, you know, SDGs and COP and NDCs and all the sort of acronyms and nuances in that. In our community, which is really hard to wrap your head around. So I think, you know, finding what speaks to you is really important, so that your voice is genuine. And I think, you know, what I say in a lot of the public speaking that I do is, if you're not really too sure what you care about, imagine yourself at a party surrounded with your friends and their partners, and just imagine they said something that was, you know, going to get your back up, because that's probably what you care about. And I think, you know, it's kind of the same with climate. It's such a broad spectrum, and it's really just trying to find what you care about, so that's authentic. And then, you know, why is it really important to be systemic? Well, you know, it's really, really important that we work with the government and, you know, lobby them for more ambitious climate action. And the CCC last week, you know, published their their 6th carbon budget, which is the pathway to net zero. And I'm actually just going to pull up the graph here. And it basically has a simple pie chart, and it's talking about low carbon technologies or fuels with no societal changes or behavioural changes. And then it's talking about the next sort of slice of the pie, if you like, is measures with a combination of low carbon technologies and societal or behavioural changes. And then just largely societal or behavioural changes. So in that net zero report last week, personal lifestyle choices were only, if we were just to do them alone, only equated to 16% in reduction of emissions. However, if we work to use the low carbon technologies, and that would be 41%, and measure and do the same with behavioural changes, it was 43%. So we obviously, in terms of the IPCC science, have not very long,
less than a decade, right?
Yeah, to really try and hammer down our carbon emissions. So, like the CCC recommendations last week, we really need to make sure that we focus on those systemic issues. And I think, and somebody alluded to this earlier, what's been really, I think, has highlighted this is coronavirus. We halted global economies pretty much. We halted global aviation, and we were still emitting 95% of the emissions. So really our job at Protect Our Winters is how can we explain these issues to our community in a way that they'll understand and can get on board with. And then how can we rally the passionate outdoor people to champion these policies and put pressure on the government to push them through. For example, next year, Protect Our Winters UK are running a big campaign around North Sea fossil fuel extraction. But how can we rally that voice and push that through? And I think another good observation to have is that we've had all these targets that have been kind of plucked out of thin air, whether that's Scotland or the UK. But the real work now is to make sure that this is transformed into hardcore policy and commitments. And Scotland just published their commitments, or their updated climate change plan yesterday, and it's still very short of delivering a 75% reduction by 2030. So yeah, I think that's the importance of keeping it systemic, because we have to have mass carbon reductions, and then translating that for our community so that they can understand, own it, champion it, and really show that diversity within the civic movement of environmentalism. Because we've got to remember that civic support equals parliamentary support. So if a bunch of snowboarders from Aviemore in the Highlands are concerned about good green jobs, and so are the faith groups, and so are the agricultural and growing groups, soon we have a very diverse voice, which will push this policy through, because that fundamentally is going to win them votes or not.
And I think often in everything that you've said, what's amazing is that it really requires so much of a mass mobilization. And I think that's where you get the power to make the difference. And I say this because I myself work in sustainable finance. And I noticed that for years, I think the finance community only really engaged with other people in the finance community on this topic. And now we're seeing really new alliances form with science, with industry groups, with people that they never worked with before. And I think that's the only way to really scale this up properly, because often, and this is what I find really interesting, what you say about what speaks to you. And for me, what speaks to me is the fact that often these solutions already exist. It's not like we don't have wind energy, or we don't have solar, or we don't have good systems to manage waste. We just have ineffective processes by which to achieve those outcomes. And I think so much of what's required is actually a humility to say, you know what, maybe the way we've been doing things is not actually the well, it's not even just maybe, it's a certainty that the way that we've done things has to move from the idea that climate change was a belief and a lifestyle and a choice to actually climate change is a scientific threat, and it's a crisis, and therefore we have a responsibility economically from a risk perspective, environmentally from a risk perspective. But the flip side, on the opportunity of that, we have this amazing chance to engage all of our customers, all of our communities, all of our civic society on this issue. And I think when we move from that place of fear around climate change, which it is quite a scary, big threat, and we see it all the time in terms of weather volatility and everything, even in our own community, that the melting of the snow is the starkest it's ever been. But I think there are solutions out there, and in everything that you've just said, Lauren, it shows that there are clear pathways to actually push that forward, whether it's using your voice through policy, whether it's discussing with, if you're a skier, go speak to a farmer about what are you doing on the ground. I remember I had an interesting discussion with some people in the Lake District in the UK about conservation, because I noticed that a lot of what's going on in terms of biodiversity loss is actually could be something that we connect to hill walkers to try and get them to engage on the topic. And maybe there's something there about the influence of the people that enjoy being in nature to actually connect through and then push and advocate for that issue. So I think, it really is inspiring in what you're doing at POW, because you're tackling so many forces of that spider web that is climate change and putting a real tangibility to what can be done. I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm going to switch quickly to the Q&A before we move to the breakouts and introduce our facilitators as well. So I see a couple of questions coming in on the chat from Jim McNeil. I think I'm going to try and bundle them together a little bit, Jim, in the conscious of time. So Lonneke, we've got a question around, do you ever see reverse inquiries? So hotels, B&Bs approaching you on how to become more sustainable. And in a similar light, are there organisations that work with the accommodations to actually help them transition their practices? I know that a couple of people on this call actually are doing that in the French Alps. I don't know, Jim, if you've spoken to Gavin before, but I think I can connect you by email, because I think he's definitely working on that in French chalets in terms of that transition. But Lonneke, I don't know if you want to quickly answer that before we move on to the breakout.
Yes, I want to. Certainly. Okay, regarding the first question, yes, we experience that more and more hotels and B&Bs are asking these questions. So that's good to see, because this was also the intention about Book Different. It was about making, I understand that if you want to invest as a hotelier in sustainability, it means you have to earn money with it as well, because it's also a economical reason why you should step in. So yes, we do. Usually what I do is then connect them to the certifications bodies we work with, and these are in total 32, and this is really depending on the location. And yes, I also have, but this is more in my network, people or organizations that can help you to become more sustainable and advise you in this case. So I'm happy to make a list, for example, and share this with you, so you can share it with everybody who is in at the moment taking part of the conference, or other ones who are interested in it as well.
Amazing.
You can also reach. Yeah.
Sorry.
You can, of course, also reach me. I will put in the chat my email address so that you can. Oh yeah, you can also. I will do it like this, so you can reach out to me directly if you want.
And we've got all of the QR codes on LinkedIn as well for everybody to connect with the speakers. So we'd really encourage that, because that would be great. So this brings me really nicely onto our breakout session with our facilitators. So I'm going to bring Gary and Ruth into the room to introduce themselves. So as I mentioned, they're both real experts on sustainability. They've been in the industries for many years, and I think they're really at the forefront of both grassroots initiatives and also broader on the wider policy and community side. So Gary's been setting up a sustainable fashion initiative in India, and also works in the sector as well on sustainability. And Ruth really is a pioneer on the SDGs and works for the UN, and also engages a lot on what the young UN and the kind of youth of large organisations can do to engage on sustainability. And as I mentioned, I both know them from my work at Cambridge, and I want to just give you guys the floor a little bit to just introduce yourselves, and then we'll move on to the breakout rooms. Just to let you know how they work, you'll just press join now when we move to them, and we'll be in those for about 20 minutes before coming back to this main room for a quick 5-minute reflection. Gary, I don't know if you want to quickly can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, it's been a pleasure. I live in any hills or any alpine tourism, but it's my interest in sustainability. When I first learned about the impact of the fashion industry, which was rightly pointed out even during one of the panels. And since then, I've been working in the fashion supply chain, trying to learn about these impacts from where the clothes are made. So I work at Shahi Exports, which is India's largest apparel manufacturer. So really working with them on their sustainability and communications. And that interest kind of led me to build India's first sustainable fashion community. So bringing together people who are working in this space, similar to POW, but we're not there yet. We're quite new. So bringing together people who are interested in sustainable fashion, working in the space to really come together, engage with each other and collaborate. And that nicely led me to meet Ruth and Sarisher. My master's research at CISL focused on collaboration, which was a theme that cut across all the topics today. So my master's research really tried to look at, can buyers, which is the brands and retailers, find better ways to collaborate with their suppliers, so manufacturers of clothes and textiles, to really achieve circular fashion objectives. Because right now there's a huge disconnect between the two, and while brands have set, great goals around circularity, where they find ways to enable collaboration.
Amazing. And I think you've definitely been at the forefront of a lot of those discussions on circularity, Aaron. Anyway, I know I called you many times throughout the masters, kind of seeking advice on what you thought around where this was going to go. So yeah, I definitely encourage you to connect with Gary on some of those issues as well. And Ruth, if you could just quickly introduce yourself as well and say a bit about, because you're based in Geneva, so obviously you might have an interesting context on that place as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for the discussion. It's been really, really interesting. So yeah, I'm definitely a mountain person. It's very strongly in my heritage, in my bones. I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, and yeah, now living in Geneva. So I'm a keen skier and mountaineer, and road biker and all that stuff. And yeah, I work at the United Nations, and have been, as Rish mentioned, kind of setting up this network of people trying to affect large-scale systems change within the UN system to make it live up to its own values, including around sustainability. And I did my research on employee activism and movements within organizations on climate action. So I looked at collectives in the tech sector, architecture, lawyers and public sector collectives who are trying to come together to change their organizational systems and sectors to live up to what we need for climate action. So yeah, looking forward to the breakout room. Thanks for having us.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm constantly learning from you as well. I think there's a lot of similarities on the corporate side and how you actually try and push through some of those barriers that might exist, especially on the behavioural front. I think that was touched upon by quite a few people today as well, in terms of trying to engage people with what is a common shared value. And I think the SDGs are an amazing lever to do that. And for anyone that missed the session at the end of October, we actually looked at the SDGs as well, applied to alpine tourism. So I'd encourage you guys to check that out as well. So now we're just going to move to the breakout room. So all you'll have to do is just click join when you see a button coming up on the screen. And you should be in separate rooms with myself, Ruth, or Gary. And we're going to be just delving more into some of the themes that we've talked about, especially on enablers and on what you think we can do for our own personal action as well. So I don't know, Dan, if we could just open the breakouts, that would be great. And we are going to come back to this room at the end of the session, just for a quick 5-minute reflection on what we discussed. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining the breakouts. I hope you found them interesting. I know in the one that we had, there was such a diversity of discussion and then really a focus on what we actually need to do to collaborate together. And I think that's the great thing from my perspective about SATI, is it's about making sure that these connections actually lead to tangible actions and discussions going forward. So please do connect with the people in your group, and I'd strongly encourage that as well. So I'm going to hand over to Gary and Ruth to give a bit of an overview of what the reflection was from your sessions. I think we've only got about 5 minutes left to finish, so if we could do a quick 1-minute reflection, that would be great. I guess, Ruth, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Fish. And thanks to everyone in the breakout session. So we discussed quite a lot the kind of angle around communication, information and sharing, that often it's kind of a real, complicated. It's not like in the right places, you know, if you're booking and you don't realize it, or there's various hubs but they're not connected to each other, and basically also that it's a lot about how you frame it, so like making sure that people have a positive feeling about it, also working more with local tourist boards and départements, and then also kind of balancing sort of this is really serious and urgent and we need to change our behavior, but also like kind of fun messaging, and people are going on holidays, they don't want to just be like kind of fear-based messaging, which can be a bit daunting. Then we also spoke, so one idea was to do like a dummies guide, or like some very basic information about this kind of thing, like how to, on all of the different aspects, and also to use social media more. And then in terms of the COVID angle, so there was a few kind of comments around, this is kind of slow travel is becoming more of a thing given the context on COVID, but then also the bigger existential question about like, well, what's the future of skiing and snow-based sports if we've got a climate crisis, and how do we sort of also diversify out of that and open up people's imagination so they're not just stuck in those kinds of things. And also kind of getting really good examples like the Slovenia one. How do you share that, the legislation aspect with the right people to actually influence change as well was discussed. So those are a few of the things, not in detail, but there you go. That's a few
discussed
thoughts.
a lot in the group. I think there's lots in there that we can take forward, and I think this reflection from my perspective is really critical for everyone in the room, because I think it shows you where we're trying to go next year with SATI as well, to try and actually engage on these levers going forward and the actions that we all want to see, which is amazing. And I think the social media aspect's really, really interesting. I think that's something that we can tap into a lot more to engage and build momentum. So amazing. Thank you so much, Ruth. And I guess, Gary, I'm going to hand over to you to see and discuss a bit about what you guys thought in your room.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. It was a great discussion. Of course, I can't everything, but there were like 2 or 3 main kind of takeaways, at least for me. We started off talking about the consumer side of it and talking about the value action gap. So often consumers say they want to behave sustainably and they're open to responsible tourism, but the action really doesn't match the beliefs. So one of the things that we were discussing was maybe businesses shouldn't use too many buzzwords when communicating about responsible tourism or sustainability more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
It's their responsibility to kind of use easy language, educate customers. So I found it fascinating that Snowcarbon, when I opened up their website, up front you don't see anything about sustainability. So all the stuff that Dan was talking about is built into selling why train travel is beneficial and not really talking from a sustainability point of view. So using those kinds of marketing techniques. Then we talked a bit about solutions. So we were talking about offsetting. Let's say in a hotel, could guests offset their waste for the day per day, and then we got into the morality of that. Does that encourage more waste, or is that the right kind of way to go about it? And we kind of conclusion that we're kind of in this gray transition area right now, so we have to work on both solutions. So we do need short-term solutions and long-term solutions. So for example, we do need offset while we lobby for like a frequent flyer tax, for example. So we do need to work on short and long-term solutions, and we shouldn't be shy to admit that we're in this area, and transitional solutions are also equally important at this time.
That's amazing. I think you definitely covered a lot of ground in 20 minutes, which is fantastic. Thank you so much. I think what you said about that zone of transition feels so critical from my perspective, because I think often people accuse us in mountain tourism of hypocrisy because, surely you don't need to ski, or it's not sustainable to ski. And I say that actually it's about ensuring that activity is the most sustainable process it can be. So looking at that whole system of not only how do you get to a mountain, but how do you actually try to influence change in a way which encourages a transition. And I think that kind of openness to perspective is so important. I think the impact focus is very interesting what you say. I might rewrite elements of the after actually having thought about that, because I think it's very true in the sense that it's such a big crisis in terms of climate change, and we need to often just cut through the noise and go and tangible discussions, ditch the jargon, and kind of really bring it back to what we actually have to do and the actions around that. So thank you so much, guys. I think that was really, really fascinating. I think there's a lot of overlap with what was discussed in the room that I was in as well. I think one thing that really stood out was the storytelling potential of the choices that we make. And I think, Ruth, and what you said about social media is quite strong at bridging that as well. I think there was also a question around how we push new business models in many of the discussion focused quite a lot on fashion and actually on the apparel industry, and we were looking at how can you actually bring about changes in the business model and close loops in a way which really tries to extend the life cycle of that product, whether it's the case of a manufacturer making a ski jacket out of less zips, because who needs 8 zips on a jacket, as Gav says. I think there's a big potential there. I think there's also about ensuring we don't have that trade-off between fashionability and sustainability. And so that's where new business models are really interesting, because you have rental, you have potentially subscription models as well. And finally, I think the big takeaway from my side was that policy is also quite a big driver in this space. So we need some of those action pathways to be clearer, and we also need them to be not only pull factors but push factors, in the sense of providing very transparent, clear guidelines, and Sally talked about that in her main session as well. So yeah, I think it's been a really fascinating discussion today, and I think we've had 6 of the discussions now over the last, we started the digital sessions in September, so over the last kind of 3 months, actually it's only been 3 months, feels like it's been a lot longer since we've all been together and gathered, which is great. But I'd say one thing for next year is really that we want to look ahead to the outlook, and I think the next session, just to give you a heads up, is going to be on the 15th of January, and we're going to really be addressing the 2021 outlook. And one thing that I'd like to do is, I think everything that you've all said, from speakers to facilitators to also all of the participants that have joined, is I'm really grateful for this, is that you've all brought your own perspectives to this, and you've all brought what you see as challenges, what you see as solutions. And I'll be working on over Christmas a report that gathers that, and then we're going to be presenting that in January along with some experts as well. So I'll announce the speakers very soon. I think you should know by the first week of January, so I think that'll be really interesting to see what you all think of that. But yeah, everything that you've said over the last few months is going to be condensed into that report, and I'll be sharing that with everybody that's attended the sessions over the last few months. And I can't thank you enough for your engagement and your energy and your enthusiasm, and wishing everybody well for the new year and Christmas break as well. I think very well deserved break after this crazy year, to be honest. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and yeah, please do connect with each other as well. The LinkedIn group is there. I think encourage you all to share and connect, and don't hesitate to reach out to me if you want any more info as well. Thank you so much, everyone. I can see all these lovely messages in the chat and really appreciate that. So yeah, definitely connect and get chatting to each other. That's amazing.